The Sleeping Beauty. A long time ago there was a king and a queen who wished for a child. They tried to have one, but it never happened. One day, while the queen was taking a bath, a frog came out of the water and said that her wish would be fulfilled. Before a year had passed, she would have a daughter. The queen had a beautiful little girl. The king was so happy that he ordered a great feast to celebrate. He invited not only his friends and acquaintances, but also the wise women, in order to make sure that they were kind and well-disposed towards the child. There were 13 wise women in the kingdom, but the king had only 12 golden plates for them to eat from. One of them had to stay at home. The feast was held in great splendor, and when it ended, the wise women bestowed magical gifts upon the child. One gave her virtue, another gave her beauty, and a third gave her wisdom. When the 12th prince had made his promises, suddenly the 13th prince came in. He wished to avenge himself for not being invited, and without even greeting or looking at anyone, he cried with a loud voice. The king's daughter, who was in her 15th year, pricked herself with a spindle and fell down dead. Without saying another word, she turned around and left the room. Everyone was shocked, but the 12th, whose good wish had still remained unspoken, came forward and said that it would not be death, but a deep sleep of 100 years, into which the princess would fall. The king, who loved his dear child, gave orders that every spindle in the kingdom should be burnt. Meanwhile, the gifts of the wise women were abundantly fulfilled on the young girl, for she was beautiful, modest, good-natured, and wise. I saw her, and I knew I would love her. It so happened that on the same day when she was 15 years old, the king and queen were away from home, and the princess was left in the palace all alone. So she went around and looked into all kinds of places, rooms, and chambers as she pleased, and finally came to an old tower. She climbed up a narrow, winding staircase and reached a small door. A rusty key was in the lock, and when she turned it, the door opened. There, in a small room, sat an old woman spinning flax with a spindle. "Good day, old lady," said the king's daughter. "What are you doing here?" "I am spinning," said the old woman, nodding her head. "What is that thing that rattles so merrily?" asked the girl, taking the spindle in her hands. But scarcely had she touched it when the magic spell was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger on it. The moment she felt the pain, she fell onto the bed and fell into a deep sleep. This sleep spread throughout the palace, including the king and queen, who had just returned home and entered the great hall. They began to fall asleep, as did the entire court, including the horses in the stable, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons on the roof, and even the flies on the walls. The fire on the hearth became quiet and asleep, and the roast meat stopped sizzling. The cook, who was about to scold the scullery boy for forgetting something, let him go and fell asleep. The wind stopped blowing, and not a leaf stirred on the trees surrounding the castle. However, a hedge of thorn grew around the castle, becoming higher each year. It eventually grew so high that it surrounded the entire castle, hiding it from view, including the flag on the roof. The story of the beautiful sleeping briar rose went about the country, so that from time to time kings' sons came and tried to get through the thorny hedge to the castle, but they found it impossible, for the thorns held fast together as if they had hands, and the young men were caught in them, unable to get loose again, and died a miserable death. After many long years, a king's son came to that country again, and heard an old man talking about the thorn hedge, and that a castle was said to be standing behind it, in which a wonderfully beautiful princess named Briar Rose was asleep for 100 years, and that the king and queen and all the court were also asleep. He had heard from his grandfather that many kings' sons had already come and tried to get through the hedge, but had remained stuck in it and died a pitiful death. Then the young man said, "I am not afraid. I will go and see this beautiful Briar Rose." The good old man tried to dissuade him, but he did not listen. By this time 100 years had passed, and the time had come for Briar Rose to wake up again. When the king's son approached the thorn hedge, it was nothing but beautiful flowers that parted to let him through, and then closed behind him like a hedge. In the castle yard he saw horses and dogs sleeping, and pigeons sitting on the roof with their heads under their wings. When he entered the house, flies were sleeping on the wall, and the cook was still reaching out to grab the boy, while the maid was sitting beside a black hen that he was about to pluck. He continued walking, and in the great hall he saw the entire court lying asleep, with the king and queen lying by the throne. He continued still further and saw everything. They were so quiet that you could hear a breath. Finally he arrived at the tower and opened the door to the small room where Briar Rose was asleep. She lay there so beautifully that he couldn't take his eyes off her. He stooped down and gave her a kiss, but as soon as he did, Briar Rose opened her eyes and woke up, looking at him sweetly. Then they went downstairs together, and the king, queen, and court looked at each other in surprise. The horses in the yard stood up and shook themselves. The hounds jumped and wagged their tails. The pigeons on the roof pulled their heads out from under their wings, looked around, and flew off into the open country. The fire in the kitchen flickered and burned, cooking the meat. The joint began to turn again, and the cook gave the boy a box on the ear, making him scream while the maid plucked a fowl ready for the spit. And then the wedding of the king's son to Briar Rose was celebrated in great splendor. They lived happily until the end of their days.